Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into the nuts and bolts of what is, I think, easily the most disruptive business strategy of the last 20 years.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're talking about the digital platform model. And our goal here isn't just to, list the big names we all know, your Airbnbs, your Ubers, your Amazon marketplaces.
Right.
It's to give you a detailed, step-by-step strategic roadmap. We want to show you how to build and scale one of these from the ground up.
Exactly. From the foundational economics all the way through to how you actually measure if it's working.
We've pulled together a really serious stack of sources for this one. We've got executive strategy guides, some deep academic dives on competition, and even research that looks at the really granular day-to-day reality of this kind of work.
And the mission here really is to shift your perspective.
Hmm.
You have to stop thinking like a consumer of value and start thinking like an orchestrator of value.
An orchestrator, I like that.
Because when we really look at what a platform is at its core, it's just an entity that brings together different groups of people.
Or businesses.
Or businesses, yes. Economic agents who have complementary needs. And the platform's only job is to make it easier for them to interact. They are fundamentally just intermediaries.
Okay, let's unpack that right away, because that concept, being an intermediary, is so different from the traditional businesses we all grew up with. The pipeline model.
Right, the pipeline world.
We've lived in that world forever. So what is the key strategic difference that makes platforms just so disruptive?
It really all comes down to two things: control and asset ownership.
Okay.
A traditional pipeline business. Think of, a classic hotel chain like Marriott or a big manufacturing company like Ford.
Sure. They make the cars, they own the factories.
Exactly. They control the entire production chain from start to finish. They own the assets, the factories, the inventory, the real estate, and they manage that customer relationship all the way through.
Right. From the raw materials to the final sale.
Platforms, on the other hand, they do the opposite. They facilitate transactions. They don't control them. They depend entirely on their ecosystem partners.
The third parties.
The sellers, the drivers, the hosts, they are the ones actually creating the value.
So a platform's power isn't in what it owns, but in what it can connect.
That's it in a nutshell. And that's why platforms are almost always asset-light. Airbnb doesn't own the rooms or hire the cleaning staff.
And Uber doesn't own the cars or pay for oil changes?
Precisely. Their competitive advantage comes from that intermediation, from leveraging the assets and labor and inventory of other people instead of owning it themselves.
That has to change the risk profile completely.
Dramatically. If demand suddenly drops, that traditional pipeline company is stuck with massive fixed costs, empty hotel rooms, idle factories.
Which is a huge liability.
A huge liability. The platform, because it's asset light, can scale its costs down almost instantly. They just have fewer interactions to process.
And this whole shift, this move to a super scalable asset light model, it wasn't just a new idea somebody had. It was driven by technology, right? By some really fundamental changes in computing.
Absolutely. The key digital enabler here, without a doubt, was the rise of cloud computing.
And the whole software as a service model that came with it?
Yes, SaaS. Because historically, if you wanted to build any kind of digital business at scale, you faced these massive upfront fixed costs for computing.
You had to buy your own servers.
You had to buy the servers, you had to staff the data centers, you had to guess how much capacity you'd need for your busiest day of the year. It was a huge barrier to entry.
Right, which meant you needed a ton of capital investment and a lot of runway before you could even find out if people wanted your product.
Precisely. Then cloud computing comes along, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and it completely flips that model on its head.
It turns that huge fixed cost
into a much lower and much more flexible variable cost.
This one innovation just blew the doors open. It meant startups didn't need millions in capital just for infrastructure anymore.
So they could actually enter these really competitive markets far more easily. They can start small. And this is the crucial part. They can scale up almost infinitely just by turning a dial and increasing their subscription to the cloud. There's almost no capacity constraint.
That flexibility is the bedrock.
It's the bedrock that the entire modern platform business model is built on.
That shift from what they call capital expenditure to operational variable cost, that is the silent game changer.
It really is.
It means you can actually afford to test your idea, to pivot your strategy, to grow exponentially without this crushing weight of owning physical assets first. It basically democratized the ability to launch a global business.
It did. And that technological shift feeds directly into this strategy orchestration, which brings us to the the really core economic forces that decide if a platform is going to fly or if it's going to crash and burn.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into the step-by-step roadmap, what are those fundamental economic forces that drive a platform's success or its failure?
Well, the core identity of any platform, what makes it a platform, is its ability to manage something called network effects, or NS.
Right.
Unlike a traditional business where the value is pretty static, I mean, the value of a hammer doesn't really change based on how many other people own hammers.
Sure.
Platform value is totally interdependent. Network effects are positive if the value of interacting for every single person on the platform goes up when more people join.
Yeah.
And it's not a straight line.
So it's not just about getting a high user count. It's about the fact that having more people in Group A has to make the experience fundamentally better for the people in Group B.
That is the critical distinction. We're not just talking about any network effect. We are primarily concerned with what are called cross-side network effects.
Next side.
It's that link between the distinct market groups. The classic example is an app store. The more app developers you have on one side making apps.
The more valuable the platform is for me, the end user, because I have more apps to choose from.
Exactly. But it works in both directions. The more end users like you that join.
The more valuable the platform becomes for the developers because their potential audience is bigger.
Precisely. It's this deep bidirectional interdependence. And that single idea shapes every single strategic decision that comes after it, from how you launch to how you set your prices.
So if that network effect is the engine, then the first goal is to get it up to a speed where it can take off. Well, it's often called the critical mass threshold.
You've hit it. Products that have these adoption externalities, these network effects, they have a really weird, nonlinear growth curve.
It's not a smooth ramp up.
Not at all. Below that critical mass point, adoption is painfully slow. You're just fighting for every user.
Yeah.
But once the network hits that threshold, that tipping point, demand just explodes. It expands significantly and disproportionately.
Let's use the classic example here. The history of the fax machine is always the one people bring up.
It's the perfect illustration.
Yeah.
The technology for the fax machine existed for years, but for the longest time, adoption was just slow, incremental.
A few businesses had one, but it was a niche thing.
Exactly. It was a convenience. But then it hit a critical mass. Enough corporate offices, enough government agencies got one, and suddenly the utility just went through the roof.
Right. Before that point, owning a fax machine was a nice to have. After that point, not owning one was a major business liability.
The value shifted almost overnight. Not because the machine got better, but because the network, the pool of people you could interact with, became essential.
And the consequence of that for platforms is this very high risk of failure if they can't get there.
It's a binary outcome. It's often either everybody uses the system or nobody does. There's very little middle ground.
Which really hammers home why that initial launch phase is just so existential. You're not just building a product, you have to build a population, a functioning digital society.
And to get that society to grow and to stay engaged, the platform absolutely has to deliver on some very specific jobs. This is what we call the 4 fundamental utilities that make up the platform's value architecture.
So what does this all mean for the user experience? What are the core jobs a platform has to perform for me to want to stick around?
There are 4, and they build on each other. They are discovery, matching, transaction, and evaluation.
Okay, let's start with discovery.
Discovery is the foundation. It's the most basic value you can add. So many markets are just plagued with inefficiency, right? It's hard to find what you're looking for. There are huge search costs. There's no transparency.
You just don't know what your options are.
Exactly. So the platform's first job is to be an info mediation service. It just lubricates the friction in searching, in identifying, and selecting potential partners.
It's like a supercharged, searchable, classified ad section.
That's a great way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for many platforms, especially in developing economies, this is where they start and sometimes where they stop. Just getting all the hyper-local businesses that were only discoverable by word of mouth onto a single searchable list, that alone is huge value.
So discovery is about making the invisible visible.
Perfect. But the second utility, matching, that takes it a giant step further.
Okay.
It goes beyond just a simple search function. It enables mutual choice making.
What do you mean by mutual?
Well, in traditional retail, the choice is one way. I go to Amazon, I choose a product. The product doesn't care who I am.
Right. It's indifferent.
But in many platform environments, think about gig work or online dating or finding a specialized consultant, both sides have to agree. The choice is bidirectional.
That has to make the underlying algorithms so much more complex. You're not just indexing my preferences, you have to align them with someone else's.
Correct. Matching requires the platform to capture the preferences and the behaviors of both sides of the market. Then it has to segment the users and curate the results. If your platform is for, say, online tutoring, it's not enough to know the student's needs. You also need to know the tutor's availability, their expertise, their preferred teaching style.
And if that alignment fails, the whole thing falls apart.
The platform delivers zero value, even if you have 1 million users on your list from the discovery phase.
Okay, so you found someone, you've matched with them. What's next?
The third utility is transaction. Assuming a match is made, the platform has to reduce the friction in the actual exchange of value.
The payment.
The payment, the contract, the communication. This is where credibility and trust are really built. And it requires a massive investment in the back end to handle financial transfers, to make sure everyone lives up to their promises, and to provide some kind of arbitration if things go wrong.
I can imagine this is a huge challenge for global platforms. You're dealing with different currencies, different tax laws, different legal systems.
It is. And if the platform gets this wrong, if it's actually easier or cheaper for the users to complete the transaction outside the platform,
They'll just do that. They'll bypass you.
they will bypass you, and that's called leakage. It's an existential threat to your ability to make money.
Which leads to the final piece of the puzzle, which has to be about trust.
The final, and I would say indispensable utility, evaluation. This is the whole infrastructure for building confidence. We often call it the 3RF: ratings, reviews, recommendations, and feedback.
Okay.
This is the platform's main defense against what economists call asymmetric information.
The fear that you're going to get ripped off.
Exactly. The fear that the provider is misrepresenting the quality of their service, that's hidden information. Or the fear that they're going to act opportunistically once they have your money, that's hidden action.
And in our sources, you drew a really important distinction between ratings and recommendations. Can you break that down for us?
I can. So a rating is usually quantitative,
Yeah.
5-star score, a thumbs up or down. And ratings are often good enough when the service is pretty standardized. You know, a seller's rating on eBay. You just want to know if they ship on time.
You care about the collective reputation.
The collective reputation. Reviews add the qualitative detail, the story behind the rating. But recommendations, they introduce a third layer. The quality of the person doing the evaluating actually matters.
So a recommendation is a targeted endorsement from someone I trust.
Exactly. If you're on a platform for discovering new art, you're probably going to value the recommendation from a well-regarded art critic much more than the cumulative 5-star rating from 1,000 random users. The platform uses that difference, who is recommending and why, to build a more sophisticated web of trust.
So mastering all four of those, discovery, matching, transaction, and evaluation, that's the whole ballgame for building a sustainable platform.
It is non-negotiable.
Okay, we've laid out the economics and the architecture. Now we have to hit the single biggest hurdle, getting those first users. The ultimate catch-22.
This is the most challenging, truly existential phase of building a platform.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If nobody joins until everyone joins, how on earth do you even get started? How do you solve that chicken and egg or cold start problem?
The problem all comes down to user psychology. Users are smart. They know the platform's value depends on the network. So if they sign up on day one and they see a ghost town, no supply, no demand, their initial pessimistic expectation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
They leave and tell their friends not to bother.
And they guarantee the platform fails. So to break that cycle, you cannot treat both sides of your market equally. You have to pick a side to focus on.
You have to choose your chicken or your egg.
You do.
Huh.
And you need a rigorous way to decide which side is the most efficient lever to attract the other side. This is what we call the lever selector framework.
You know, the lever selector framework.
To use it, you have to compare two critical variables for each of your user groups. First is user acquisition cost, or UAC. That's the effort it takes to get them in the door.
And the second?
The second is attraction power, or AP. That's the magnetic pull they have on the other side once they join. The entire strategic objective is simple. You pour all of your initial resources into the group that has the lowest UAC and/or the highest AP.
All right, let's drill down into the effort side of that lever. User acquisition cost. It's got to be more complicated than just the cost of a Facebook ad.
Oh, much more. UAC is really derived from 3 different factors, and they relate to effort, investment, and trust.
Let's start with the first one.
The first is prospecting. Basically, how efficiently can you identify and reach your potential users?
How easy are they to find?
Exactly. If you can contact them in a massive, automated, centralized way, your UAC plummets. For example, a B2B platform trying to target software companies can just scrape official corporate registries. That's a low prospecting cost.
Compared to what?
Compared to a platform trying to find, say, individual, highly specialized freelance artists who are scattered across hundreds of different niche websites and forums, that's a high prospecting cost.
So centralized data means cheaper acquisition. That makes sense. What about the user side of the effort, with the investment they have to make?
That's the second factor. Easing adoption.
Yeah.
This is all about the investment, both tangible and intangible, that the user has to make to start using your platform.
Like, do I need to buy special equipment?
Exactly. Do you need to buy a specific asset like a high-end VR headset for a gaming platform? Is there a really steep learning curve involved? And crucially, you have to ask yourself, does the user get any standalone benefits even if the network is tiny?
Standalone benefits. So value outside of the network.
Yes, if a user gets immediate utility, let's say your platform has a really powerful scheduling tool built in, they're more likely to join and stick around, even if the main marketplace hasn't taken off yet. If you have low standalone benefits, your UAC is going to be much higher.
So a platform that's purely a social network has a much higher intrinsic UAC than a platform that also offers a useful tool as a bonus.
Precisely. The user has way less incentive to take that leap of faith on the network if the standalone value is zero.
Okay, what's the third piece of UAC?
The third factor is establishing trust. This is a measure of the platform's cost to reduce a user's suspicion or their fear of, getting scammed by someone on the other side.
So how much do you have to spend to make people feel safe?
Exactly. If one side of your market is highly vulnerable, think of a small landlord renting out their apartment to a complete stranger for the first time.
Like the early days of Airbnb.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
The platform has to invest a ton in screening, in insurance, in validation processes. All of that costs money, and it all goes into the UAC. The higher the perceived risk for the user, the higher your trust-building costs are going to be.
Which means a platform dealing in high-value, high-risk transactions like finance or long-term rentals has to budget for a much higher UAC than, say, a platform for sharing cat videos.
Absolutely. The regulatory and liability costs are baked right into that UAC calculation.
Okay, so that's the effort side of the lever. Let's switch to the beam side, attraction power. AP. This is the strength of that cross-side network effect. How do you quantify a magnetism?
Attraction power is mostly influenced by two dynamics, and they both center on scarcity and necessity. The first one is relative scarcity. This is pretty straightforward. The group that has fewer potential users often has a much stronger attraction power, simply because they're a rarer resource.
And you can measure this.
You can absolutely measure this. We see it so clearly in the gig economy. The provider-to-customer ratio is just stark. The estimates we've seen suggest it's about one host for every 70 guests on Airbnb.
Wow.
And maybe one driver for every 50 riders on Uber. The hosts and the drivers are the scarce resource, and their presence on the platform is the powerful magnet that pulls in that massive customer base.
So the secret here is to identify your bottleneck resource, the side that's hardest to grow, and realize that they are your most powerful marketing tool.
That is the core strategic insight. If you can get the scarce side on board, the sheer volume of the mass market side is much more likely to follow.
Okay, what's the second factor for attraction power?
The second factor is outside interaction difficulty. Another way to think of this is lower substitutability.
So how hard is it to find these people without using my platform?
Exactly. The harder it is for the other group to interact with the scarce group outside the platform, the stronger this group's attraction power becomes on the platform. If you become the essential gateway to that resource, your AP goes through the roof.
That seems like it would be harder to measure. How do you quantify how difficult it is to find a service without you?
You measure substitutability. Think about a platform that connects, say, operators of high-end industrial machinery with specialized construction clients.
Okay, very niche.
Very niche. The clients could find these operators through trade shows or maybe expensive headhunters, but it's slow, it's costly, and it doesn't scale. If your platform gives them instant, verified access to hundreds of certified operators, the outside interaction difficulty is very high, which means those operators have immense attraction power on your platform.
You've essentially monopolized the information channel.
And you've made your platform indispensable.
So the secret to cracking the cold start is this rigorous two-sided analysis. You use the lever selector to find the side that's either cheapest to acquire or most powerfully attractive, and you just pour all of your initial resources into that one side.
Even if it means subsidizing them heavily at the start, the choice is totally dependent on comparing those UAC and AP figures for both sides.
And if side A has low UAC and high AP, the path is obvious.
The path is clear. But if both sides have a high UAC and a low AP, well, you might have a cool idea, but you probably don't have a viable business model yet.
Okay, so let's move from theory to execution. Based on this framework, what are the specific playbooks, the actual strategies for kickstarting a platform?
We can really group the launch efforts into 3 general strategies, and each one is determined by that UAC and AP balance we just talked about.
And I assume the simplest case is when the framework gives you a clear winner, a clear asymmetry.
That's right. That's the pick a starter strategy. This is what you use when one side has a huge advantage, either super low UAC or just overwhelmingly high AP. They are the obvious concentrated target.
And the main tactic here is what you call the golden egg or marquee users.
It's attracting those users who, just by their sheer star power, instantly create that cross-side network effect for you.
They bring their audience with them.
Yes. This is all about attracting those high-value, influential users who provide instant validation. The best recent example is the video game live streaming war that peaked a few years back.
Twitch versus Mixer.
Exactly. Twitch was totally dominant. When Microsoft wanted to launch their competitor, Mixer, they didn't try to grow their user base organically. That would have taken forever.
So what did they do?
They engaged in these massive high-stakes contracts to just poach the top streamers from Twitch, most famously Ninja and Shroud.
And they paid them tens of millions of dollars.
They did. And the goal was immediate, immense attraction power. The theory was that millions of their followers would instantly switch ecosystems, bringing the entire demand side with them in one fell swoop.
It's a powerful strategy, but it's also incredibly expensive and really risky, right? I mean, Mixer eventually shut down anyway.
And that highlights the massive trade-off. Marquee users are expensive, they demand exclusivity, and they have all the bargaining power. The platform is incredibly vulnerable if that star leaves or if their following just isn't as sticky as you thought.
Which was part of the problem. The audience followed the personality, not the platform.
They did, and eventually they just drifted back to Twitch or went to YouTube.
Okay, so let's take the much harder scenario. What if the group with that super high traction power is also really, really expensive to acquire? High AP, but also high UAC. You absolutely have to have them, but they won't come easily or cheaply.
That situation leads you to the second strategy, the buy up or replace strategy. Because they're indispensable, you have no choice but to either integrate them or essentially purchase their participation at the beginning.
And the first tactic you have for this sounds like a strategic retreat. You have to temporarily act like the pipeline business you swore you'd never be.
It's exactly that. The tactic is lay the first eggs yourself, or the pipeline start. You temporarily operate as an integrated pipeline providing the scarce service yourself until you can get the external supply side on board and scaled up.
Ooh, can you give us an example?
The food delivery service Deliveroo is a great one. They're a platform connecting diners with existing restaurants.
Right.
But they kept running into supply gaps in really dense city centers or in suburbs where there just weren't enough high-quality restaurants set up for delivery.
So in those specific markets, they had a cold start problem.
A micro cold start problem. So to solve it, Deliveroo strategically invested in building its own network of what they called Editions kitchens.
What were those?
They were delivery-only commercial kitchens, often tucked away in industrial parks. And they would prepare food from well-known restaurant brands, but exclusively for Deliveroo customers.
So they were basically operating their own restaurants.
They were. It required massive capital, huge operational overhead. They were operating physical assets and employing cooks all to create the necessary supply density in those zones to attract the diners.
Wow. So they took on a temporary operational nightmare just to prime the pump and make sure the demand side didn't leave because there were no options. That's a huge commitment.
It shows real commitment. A softer tactic under the same strategy is to buy up first users. Not by paying them, but through really intensive high-touch support to guarantee quality and keep them around.
The famous Airbnb story comes to mind here.
It's the classic case. When Airbnb was just starting in New York, their first listings were, well, they were pretty sparse and amateurish.
The pictures were terrible, I remember reading.
They were. So the co-founders didn't just sit back and iterate on the app. They physically traveled to the apartments of their first hosts.
They went door to door.
They did. They didn't pay the host cash, but they offered professional advice, they helped stage the homes, they brought better lighting, wrote better descriptions, and they hired professional photographers to take much better pictures.
All for free.
All for free. This high-touch human intervention lowered the adoption effort for the hosts, so it lowered their UAC, and it ensured the quality of the listing was high, which increased its AP. And that's what made the New York market catch fire.
I remember another tactic for this group, a much more, let's say, controversial one, basically manufacturing the network effect.
Ah, yes, the strategy of faking the chickens.
Yeah.
This means creating a temporary illusion that one side of the market already exists in order to lure in the other side.
This sounds shady.
It can be. The founders of Reddit have been very open about this. In the early days, they created hundreds of fake accounts and just seeded the site with fake content themselves to avoid that ghost town look.
So it looked busy.
It looked busy. Another example is Udemy, the online course platform. When they started, they had 0 courses, but they needed to attract instructors.
A classic chicken and egg.
Classic.
Yeah.
So the co-founder built a web crawler that went out and aggregated publicly available educational playlists from YouTube and then framed them as courses on Udemy's site.
So they faked the entire supply side.
They did. And it gave the platform the appearance of having an existing catalog of content.
It sounds like a necessary evil to get over that initial psychological hump for new users.
It is a launch tactic, but our sources are very clear that it's a cautionary tale. While the Udemy approach got them their first 10,000 users and helped them raise seed funding,
But
the founder admitted that almost all of those users bounced immediately. Faking the supply does not solve your core long-term problems. It doesn't fix quality assurance or user retention or leakage.
it's a temporary hack.
It's a temporary hack to get visibility. If you can't transition very quickly from that fake supply to real, high-quality, engaged supply, you lose all credibility and you're done.
Okay, so finally, what if the UAC and AP factors are pretty much the same for both sides? A true 50-50 split where it's impossible to bootstrap them both at the same time.
In that case, you turn to the third strategy, the Go 50-50 strategy. And this relies on external integration to get you to scale. The key tactic here is to partner with a chicken farm.
Partner with a chicken farm. So you go find someone who already has what you need.
Exactly. You integrate with a complementary existing platform or a big strategic partner to get access to an entire established user group all at once.
That seems like a brilliant shortcut to solving the UAC problem.
It is a massive shortcut. There was a platform called Fanist. Their idea was to let fashion influencers tag and sell any outfit from any brand.
A huge cold start problem.
Immense. They needed every major fashion brand on board from day one to be useful. If a user couldn't tag their favorite brand, they'd just leave.
So instead of making deals with hundreds of brands one by one,
They partnered with Zalando, which is a huge European online fashion retailer. That one partnership gave them instant API access to Zalando's entire catalog of brands and inventory
so they effectively acquired an entire side of their market overnight.
in one move. It dramatically saved them on UAC costs and gave them immediate critical mass on the supply side.
The trade-off, of course, is pretty clear. You have to share the value you create.
Precisely. The cost is usually some kind of revenue sharing agreement, and you lose direct control over that part of the user experience.
Yeah.
But for many startups, the speed to scale is absolutely worth that trade-off.
That's a fantastic breakdown of the launch phase. So once you've successfully used one of these aggressive strategies and you've hit critical mass, the focus has to shift entirely, right? To sustain scaling and dealing with competition.
Completely.
How do pricing and competitive strategy fundamentally change in this platform world?
Well, once you have critical mass, that interdependence we talked about starts to dictate your pricing. You simply cannot use a single, uniform price for everyone.
It won't work.
It won't work. Platforms have to adopt what's called a skewed price structure. That means you're strategically charging different prices to your different user groups, not just setting separate prices for separate products.
And this is where we get the concept of the money side and the subsidy side. How do you figure out which group pays and which group gets a discount? It seems kind of counterintuitive if you're trying to maximize your profit.
The decision is based on comparing two characteristics for each group: their attraction power, which we've discussed, and their price sensitivity.
Price sensitivity. So how much they care about the price.
Exactly. How likely they are to leave if you charge them too much, which is usually related to how many other options or substitutes they have outside your platform.
Okay.
The subsidy side is the group that has the higher attraction power and/or the higher price sensitivity. You give them a discount or even let them on for free to get them on board in huge numbers.
And the money side.
The money side is the group you charge more because they're the ones who capture the most value from the subsidized side's participation. They're less sensitive to price because their incentive to join getting access to that big subsidized group is so strong.
Okay, I have to challenge this a little. It sounds like you're saying we should often subsidize the group that provides the most value, the one with the most magnetic pull. Why would a business give its most important resource a discount?
Because it's a powerful economic mechanism for both efficiency and, crucially, for quality control. The core principle you have to remember is this: monetize the side that produces quality and subsidize the side that seeks quality.
Monetize the producer, subsidize the seeker. Give me an example.
Think about video game platforms, a PlayStation or an Xbox. They heavily subsidize the game players,
The quality seekers.
the quality seekers. They often sell hardware at a loss just to get a massive audience. That huge audience is exactly what the game developers, the quality providers, desperately need.
And they're the money side.
They're the money side. The platform then charges the developers a high percentage of every game sale.
Okay, I see the dynamic now. If you subsidize the players, you get millions of them, which makes the value proposition for the developers go up exponentially.
Precisely. Now, think about if you did it the other way around. If you subsidize the developers, you might attract thousands of low-quality game makers who just flood the market with junk.
Right.
But by monetizing the quality producers, price becomes an efficient filter. Only those developers who are confident they can make a good enough game to earn back the platform fee will even bother to enter.
So it guarantees a minimum level of quality for the players.
It does, and that reduces the search costs for the players, which makes the whole platform stickier for everyone involved.
That framework, subsidize the seeker, monetize the producer, is really powerful. It's the old media model, isn't it? Newspapers basically gave the paper away to readers
The subsidy side.
to attract the high-paying advertisers who are the money side.
It is the strategic blueprint for any multi-sided market. And getting that pricing model right has a huge impact on loyalty, which brings us right to the competitive dynamics.
Speaking of loyalty, once a platform does achieve dominance, it often seems to create a winner-takes-all market. What is it that drives this relentless consolidation?
These WTA markets are really driven by two conditions. You need strong, positive network effects, and you need high switching or multi-homing costs.
Multi-homing.
That's just the cost or effort involved in using more than one platform at the same time, like being both an Uber and a Lyft driver.
Got it.
So when those network effects are strong, the marginal cost of serving one more user drops to almost zero, but the value for all the existing users keeps going up. It creates this powerful, self-reinforcing loop where the big platform just gets bigger and bigger, and the small competitors can't get a foothold.
So platforms compete for the market, not in the market.
That's the classic line, and it's true.
But we've seen plenty of times where the first mover doesn't actually win.
Oh, constantly. Because the platform that wins isn't always the one that got there first. It's the one that best manages the network effects and the switching costs. I mean, think about early social media. MySpace, Friendster. They had the first mover advantage.
And Facebook just ate their lunch.
It did,
Wow.
not just by having a better product, but by strategically changing the switching costs. They opened up their social graph to third-party developers, creating this huge integrated ecosystem of apps and games that made it incredibly painful for users to leave.
And one of the biggest threats to any platform, whether it's an incumbent or a successful niche player, is the threat of envelopment.
This is a key strategic risk. It's where a huge established platform, what we'll call a shark, just integrates a niche service into its massive ecosystem, effectively surrounding and absorbing it.
What's the classic example of this?
The most impactful case was probably in the early days of consumer webmail. Hotmail and Yahoo Mail were totally dominant. They had solved the cold start problem, and they had really high switching costs because, your email address was your digital identity.
And then Google launched Gmail.
And Google launched Gmail with a feature that seems so quaint now, but it was radical at the time. 1 gigabyte of storage.
When everyone else was offering maybe a few megabytes.
Exactly. And that one feature was so valuable, it solved the constant pain of deleting emails to free up space, that users were willing to overcome those high switching costs to adopt it. Gmail completely enveloped the existing market.
And Google could do that because they were leveraging their existing infrastructure.
Right. That is the critical insight. Envelopment relies on leveraging existing resources that the smaller player just can't match. Google could offer that free storage because they had already built that massive capacity for their search product.
It creates an impossible economy of scope for the little guy to compete with.
Precisely. Which forces those smaller platforms to develop some pretty robust defensive strategies.
So what can you do? What are the primary defenses against being enveloped by a shark?
There are three main plays. The first is to focus on a specific niche. Basically, you concede the bigger market, but you double down on a segment that really values your narrow, specialized offering. You build niche-specific network effects that the big generalist platform can't easily replicate.
Deep specialization. What's the second strategy?
The second is to leverage your existing platform assets. This is more for large firms looking to expand. You scale new platforms by porting over your existing assets, your algorithms, your brand, your user networks.
Like Uber.
Uber is the perfect example. They didn't start Uber Eats from scratch. They leveraged their existing matching algorithm, their payment system, and most importantly, their existing network of vetted drivers.
So it was way cheaper for them to launch it.
Way cheaper. The synergy made it far more profitable for Uber to launch multiple delivery services than for two separate companies to try and do it.
And the third defense?
The third is to nurture the growth of complementers. The platform has to make sure that its ecosystem of external partners, the developers, the consultants, the accessory makers, remains economically healthy and keeps innovating.
You protect your developer community.
You do. By giving them good APIs, fair revenue shares, and technical support, you strengthen your ecosystem's defenses. A thriving ecosystem is like an integrated, impenetrable, competitive moat.
Now, we also have to talk about the high-risk gamble that some startups take, which is to try and leverage a big platform's network for their own launch, the remora strategy.
The remora strategy, yes. The little fish that attaches itself to the shark.
So a small startup tightly integrates with a huge platform to instantly solve their cold start problem by getting access to the shark's massive user base.
It's fast, but it comes with some serious structural trade-offs that really limit your long-term control.
What are the biggest risks for that little remora?
There are two that are absolutely critical. First is the massive holdup risk. The remora makes these big, asset-specific investments. They build their whole company around integrating with the shark's APIs like Facebook Login or Google Maps.
Their business depends on it.
It does. And if the shark decides one day to change its API or restrict access to data or just change the rules, the remora is instantly stranded. Their entire business model rests on the goodwill of the shark.
And the second risk?
The second is seeding monetization control. The shark always controls the highest value interactions. If a small discovery startup builds on top of a search giant, the giant is going to take all the prime advertising spots, leaving the startup with just the scraps.
So you give up control over who you monetize and how much you can charge.
You do. The remora has to constantly provide some new, differentiated value, maybe more complex matching, on top of the shark's basic discovery, just to justify its own existence and its own price tag.
Okay, so building the platform is one thing, but sustaining that competitive edge requires this constant adaptation and critically operational excellence. What are the big architectural decisions that govern that sustainable growth?
Well, sustained growth is really governed by one core architectural trade-off: the choice between being an open or a closed platform.
And openness is just how much you share your technology with third parties.
Exactly. It's the extent to which you share your technology, your interfaces, your development tools with those outside complementers.
And what drives the choice between one or the other?
Openness is a strategy for speed and versatility. If you share your tech, third parties can create a huge variety of apps and services for you very quickly, which triggers those positive cross-site network effects and helps you expand fast.
Let you give up control.
You give up control on a lot of the value. A closed platform, on the other hand, allows the firm to charge premium prices and maintain really tight, centralized control over the user experience and their intellectual property.
The sources laid this out as a spectrum, right? Based on different user roles.
That's right. You can be open or closed to 4 different groups: the end users, the developers, the hardware makers, and the platform sponsor who owns the core OS.
Give us the examples.
So on one extreme, you have the Linux ecosystem. It is radically open across all 4 of those roles. It prioritizes being everywhere over capturing profit.
And on the other extreme,
You have the Apple iOS ecosystem. It is closed to almost everyone except the end user. Apple controls the OS, the hardware, and it tightly regulates who can be a developer through the App Store.
And Android is somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. Google controls the core IP, but allows a lot of openness for independent hardware makers like Samsung to build on top of it. That choice, open versus closed, fundamentally dictates your rate of innovation, the breadth of your ecosystem, and how you make your money.
Okay, that structural choice is the foundation. Now let's pivot to the most vital operational need for day-to-day function. Trust. Without it, the whole market just collapses.
Absolutely. A platform's foremost and continuous responsibility is to establish a climate of trust. It is the only way you can mitigate the risks of that asymmetric information problem we talked about.
Hidden information and hidden action.
Exactly. The fear that the service isn't as good as advertised, or the fear that the provider is going to behave badly. If buyers can't trust the quality, they will always revise their price expectations downward, and you end up in a market for lemons where only low-quality stuff survives.
So platforms have to solve this on an industrial scale. What are the actual mechanisms they can use?
They fall into two buckets: management, which are active interventions by the platform, and facilitation, which is user-driven governance.
So management is the platform taking direct responsibility.
Yes, the platform actively bears the collective reputational risk. This includes things like comprehensive screening to vet providers, offering warranties, and providing insurance products, like Airbnb's host protection insurance.
So the user learns to trust the platform's brand, not every single anonymous seller.
That's the goal. And facilitation, on the other hand, uses the community itself to govern behavior.
This is the 3R system.
Yes, ratings, reviews, and recommendations. The platform provides the framework, but the users generate the trust data that allows everyone else to evaluate risk. The huge operational challenge here is just making sure these systems are actually trustworthy and not being manipulated. Fighting fake reviews is a massive ongoing investment.
Okay, moving from building trust to protecting your profits. One of the biggest threats to a platform that takes a cut of transactions is platform leakage or bypass. What is that and how do you stop it?
Leakage is when your users find a match on the platform, so they use you for discovery and matching, but then they complete the transaction outside the platform to avoid paying your fees.
I can see this happening all the time in high-value repeat businesses, like a consultant and a client connect, and after the first job, they just decide to work directly.
It is incredibly common, and it's a kind of self-sabotage dynamic for the platform.
So how do you curb that incentive to cheat the system?
You use a mix of proactive and reactive actions. Proactive actions are all about having a superior user experience. It has to be demonstrably easier, safer, and more convenient to do everything inside the platform than outside.
Frictionless payments, good communication tools, reliable arbitration.
Everything. If using the platform is a hassle, users will always find a way to leak.
And what about the reactive actions? They sound more like a penalty.
They are. Reactive actions are about raising the user's cost of bypassing you. And strategically, the best way to do this is by helping them build up valuable assets on the platform that they would lose if they left.
Like their reputation.
Exactly. Their accrued reputation, a high rating, a long history of successful jobs, a credit balance, loyalty points, all of that acts as a powerful sunk cost. That reputation capital creates a protective layer around your network, and it's a strong deterrent against leakage.
It's the ultimate lock-in. Okay, finally, operational excellence means measuring what matters. How do you measure performance in a multi-sided business? It's way more complex than a pipeline just looking at revenue and customer acquisition cost.
You have to throw out the traditional metrics and adopt a tool that's adapted for platform dynamics. It's called the Multi-Sided Balance Scorecard, or MBSE.
And it adapts the traditional management perspectives.
It does, but it makes one critical shift at the very top.
Which is?
The user perspective is placed at the top, replacing the old customer perspective. And this is a huge strategic shift. You have to track users, not customers, and recognize that they play different roles.
A buyer is not a seller, is not a developer.
Exactly. And the platform has to set distinct objectives and indicators for each group. You have to track the satisfaction of an Etsy buyer and an Etsy seller completely separately, because their motivations and their attraction powers are totally different.
Okay, so that's the top level. What about the internal workings? How do you measure the quality of the interaction itself?
That is the interaction perspective. This focuses on the level and quality of interaction, not just the raw number of users. Key metrics here are things like the time to match, the total transaction volume, and managing the often overlooked problem of congestion.
Congestion sounds like a negative network effect, but one of our sources had a fascinating, counterintuitive take on it.
It did. There was research on a major heterosexual dating platform that found a clear congestion problem. Way more men were on the platform, and they were more active than the women.
About two-thirds men, one-third women.
Yes. And this excess supply created negative network effects for the men. They faced more competition, got fewer matches, and had to wait longer for a response.
But for the women,
But for the scarce side, the women, this congestion was actually beneficial. They had a larger pool of waiting male profiles
Yeah.
who had already shown interest.
so the platform could actually leverage the frustration of the majority to create immense value for the scarce minority, which makes the platform stickier for the very people they most need to keep.
Exactly. So for a platform manager, just reducing congestion might seem like a good idea for the overall user experience, but you could actually be destroying value for your most important user group. Your metrics have to capture these nuanced, asymmetrical dynamics.
What's the third perspective? The one that ensures the engine stays healthy long-term.
That's the network effects perspective. This is where you measure the ongoing health of those feedback loops. You track the speed of adoption on both sides and the stability of the network's value. Is a new user still adding value for the existing users?
And if they're not, that's a red flag.
It's a huge red flag that your competitive moat is starting to weaken.
And finally, the bottom line.
The financial perspective. The metrics here are totally dependent on how you make money. If you're based on advertising or subscriptions, you're tracking monthly active users, MAU, and growth velocity. If you take a transaction fee, then you're tracking gross merchandise value, GMV, the total sales value flowing through your system.
This whole MBSC framework really shows how platforms demand this unique strategic attention. Not just in how they're built, but in how their success is even defined and measured. You can't make a pricing decision without understanding the network effects, and you can't build trust without anticipating leakage.
And this constant pressure for efficiency and refinement has profound implications for the humans who have to interact with these platforms. The rise of the platform economy is fundamentally changing the nature of work. It's breaking it down into these measurable, discrete tasks, and it's blurring all the traditional boundaries.
That's really where the deeper challenge lies. We talk about how these trust mechanisms and architectural choices and the pressure to automate all interact with the actual people doing the work. Like the example of the office worker, Mary, who had to deal with the broken-down robot, R12.
That scenario is a perfect illustration of the limits of automation in this world. When the algorithm fails, when the robot breaks down, when something happens that wasn't in the program, it creates immense stress and a ton of manual work for the human professional.
All this snag solving that the system was supposed to eliminate.
And it raises serious questions about productivity and motivation, when the human's main job becomes cleaning up after the machine's failures.
We saw the same challenge in social and healthcare services with the service advisors who were originally meant to help citizens navigate these complex systems.
Exactly. Their whole job has evolved.
Yeah.
They're not just service providers anymore. They become digital guides and snag solvers. Their professional skill now is not just their domain knowledge, but their ability to navigate the friction between a human's needs and a technological system that may or may not be working right.
Their job is to mediate between the user and the platform's architecture.
It is. The boundaries between the human and the digital are just fundamentally blurring. And it's demanding that we constantly redefine what it even means to be a competent professional.
And our sources define competence not just as knowing stuff, but as this dynamic interaction between your own agency, your relationships, and the technology you're forced to use.
Yes. The professional today has to have the capacity to transform how they work, individually and collectively, just to respond to the constant pressure that the platform's architecture puts on them.
That was an incredible look at the full strategic roadmap, from solving that initial cold start all the way to monitoring performance and seeing its inevitable consequences for people. The most enduring takeaway for me is that digitalization's impact is complex, it's gradual, and it just requires constant adaptation.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener.
We've spent this time discussing the importance of managing trust and dealing with automation. We've recognized that digitalization is always intensifying, and it demands constant adaptation from professionals like Mary with her robot, or the service advisors navigating those complex digital systems. So here's the question. How will human agency and professional competence be fundamentally defined and measured when so much of our economic landscape is increasingly mediated by algorithms and AI?
When the machine is the main interface for almost all economic activity, and your performance is being tracked on a multi-sided balanced scorecard, what does it even mean to be a highly effective human professional? What human skills retain their scarcity and their attraction power in a world that's defined by platform efficiency? That's the core challenge that every single one of us facing the platform economy now has to solve. Thank you for diving deep with us.